It's a feeling millions of Americans know well. You walk into the voting booth, look at the ballot, and are faced with two names for the most powerful office in the world. And you don't really like either of them. You're not alone. In recent years, a majority of Americans, Republicans and Democrats alike, have consistently told pollsters they wish they had more options. They feel trapped, forced to choose the lesser of two evils. This is the doom loop of American politics, a system that leaves most of its citizens perpetually dissatisfied, yet seems utterly impossible to change. This is why every 4 years the same questions arise. Why only two choices? How did a nation of 330 million people, born from a revolution against concentrated power, end up with the most rigid and enduring two-party system in the Western world? The common answers you hear, that it's about money or media or winner-take-all elections, are all true. But they are symptoms, not the cause. They are the branches of the tree, not the root. To find the root, you have to dig deeper, back to a constitutional crisis that almost tore the infant republic apart. The truth is, our two-party system wasn't a grand design. It was an accident. It was the unintended consequence of a desperate, last-minute patch job on the Constitution. A single amendment ratified in 1804 to solve a problem no one had ever imagined. This one change, the 12th Amendment, was a direct reaction to the chaotic election of 1800. In their rush to prevent another disaster, its authors unintentionally created the constitutional logic for the party ticket, the very mechanism that locks our two-party system in place today. Because of this single, consequential decision, a system designed by founders who hated political parties became one that could only function with them. We are living in a political house that was built by accident. To understand why we feel so trapped, we have to go back to the beginning, to a time when the founders imagined a world without parties. We have to witness the first political war that made them necessary, and the one election that broke America so badly. The only way to fix it was to create the trap we're in today. To understand the accident, you first have to understand the original machine. The men who designed the presidency were terrified of political parties. George Washington, in his farewell address, famously warned that parties served only to agitate the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms. To him, they were a cancer on the body politic. This is why the original rules for electing a president, laid out in the Constitution, were explicitly designed to be party-proof. The system was elegant in its simplicity. Each state appointed electors, and each of those electors cast 2 votes for president. They weren't voting for a president-vice president team. They were voting for 2 individuals. The person who received the most electoral votes became president. The runner-up became vice president. Think of it as a national job search for the 2 best candidates, period. The system assumed the winner and the runner-up might be political rivals. It didn't care. The goal wasn't to create a unified administration, but to elevate the 2 most respected statesmen in the nation to the highest offices. Alexander Hamilton and the other framers believed this would prevent factions from ever seizing control of the executive branch. A president from the North might have a vice president from the South. A man who favored farming might serve alongside a man who favored finance. Because of this design, the presidency was supposed to be a contest of character, not a clash of organized teams. But a fatal flaw was buried in this logic, a vulnerability no one saw. The entire system rested on one critical assumption, that every elector would be an independent thinker, casting his 2 votes for the men he personally deemed most worthy. What the founders never asked was a simple, devastating question. What happens if the electors stop thinking for themselves and start taking orders from a party? That question, what happens when electors take orders, was answered almost immediately. The first political war wasn't fought with cannons, but with pamphlets, whispers, and backroom deals. And it was a direct result of two brilliant, stubborn men who had fundamentally different visions for America's soul: Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton, the Treasury Secretary, was a man of the city. He believed America's future lay in finance, trade, and a powerful central government that could command respect on the world stage. To achieve this, he made a calculated move. He proposed a national bank and a plan for the federal government to assume state debts. This wasn't just about balancing books. It was a strategy to bind the nation's wealthy creditors to the success of the new government. If the country failed, they'd lose their fortunes. Jefferson, the Secretary of State, saw Hamilton's plan as a betrayal. A Virginia planter, he feared that a powerful central government and a national bank would create a new American aristocracy, one of money instead of birthright. He envisioned a nation of independent farmers, free from the corrupting influence of distant bankers and politicians. For Jefferson, Hamilton wasn't just wrong. He was trying to build a monarchy in disguise. This wasn't just a policy debate. It was a fight over the country's destiny. Because of this, loyalties hardened. President John Adams, caught between these two titans, sided with Hamilton's Federalists, who favored order and a strong national government. Jefferson and his allies became the Democratic Republicans, championing states' rights and the common man. The founders' ideal of independent statesmen was dead. Now there were teams. And in a political war, you demand loyalty from your soldiers, including your electors. This new reality of party warfare set the stage for the election of 1800, a contest so vicious it's still known as one of the dirtiest in American history. It was a rematch, President John Adams versus his own Vice President, Thomas Jefferson. But this time, Jefferson and his Democratic Republicans had a meticulously coordinated plan. They were determined not to repeat the messy outcome of the previous election, where the top two spots went to political enemies. Their strategy was simple and disciplined. They chose two candidates, Thomas Jefferson for president and Aaron Burr, a shrewd New York politician, for vice president. The party then instructed every single one of its electors to follow a strict order. Cast one of your two votes for Jefferson and one for Burr. No exceptions. No independent thinking. The goal was to produce a clear winner and a clear runner-up from the same party, securing both the presidency and vice presidency in a clean sweep. And then the votes were counted. The plan had worked. Perfectly. Too perfectly. Every Democratic-Republican elector had followed orders exactly as instructed. Adams and the Federalists were decisively defeated. But in their quest for party unity, Jefferson's strategists had made a fatal miscalculation. Jefferson received 73 electoral votes, and Aaron Burr also received 73 electoral votes. They hadn't created a victory, they had created a tie. Under the Constitution, a tie meant the election was thrown to the House of Representatives to decide. The system designed by the founders to elevate the two best men had just been shattered by party discipline. It had failed to produce a president at all, and instead had delivered a constitutional crisis that put the very future of the republic in doubt. The tie between Jefferson and Burr threw the nation into a state of paralysis. Because of this chaos, the future of the presidency now rested in the hands of the very party that had just lost the election, the Federalists. They controlled the House of Representatives, where each state delegation would cast a single vote to break the tie. And they faced a strategic choice. They despised Thomas Jefferson and his radical vision for America. But Aaron Burr? He was a different kind of problem. Burr was a master of political calculation, a man whose ambition was widely seen as his only true principle. Seeing his opportunity, he refused to step aside for Jefferson, the clear presidential choice of his party. His silence sent a message to the Federalists: I might be willing to make a deal. This set the stage for a political siege. For 7 days in the bitter cold of February 1801, the House voted, and voted, and voted again. 35 times the result was the same: deadlock. The country teetered on the brink of collapse. Governors of Virginia and Pennsylvania prepared to call up their state militias. Talk of civil war was everywhere. This terrifying instability forced the hand of one man, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton saw Jefferson as a dangerous idealist, but he saw Burr as something far worse, an American Napoleon, a man who would burn the Republic for his own power. In a series of letters, Hamilton made a calculated decision. He began lobbying his fellow Federalists, urging them to back his sworn enemy. His argument was brutally pragmatic. At least Jefferson is himself a Democrat, he wrote, someone with a fixed set of beliefs. Burr, he warned, was a man with none. On the 36th ballot, Hamilton's logic prevailed. A few Federalists abstained, and Thomas Jefferson became the 3rd President of the United States. The crisis was over, but its memory would haunt them all. The trauma of the 1800 election created a powerful, unified demand for a permanent solution. This is why, almost immediately, Congress began debating how to amend the Constitution to prevent such a crisis from ever happening again. The near collapse of the government wasn't a theoretical problem. They had just lived through it. They saw the flaw not in the rise of political parties, but in the simple mechanics of the electoral ballot. The problem, as they saw it, was that each elector cast 2 votes for president. This was the design that produced the absurd tie between a presidential candidate and his own running mate. The solution they devised was direct and, on the surface, entirely logical. It became the 12th Amendment. The change was deceptively simple. Instead of casting 2 votes for president, electors would now cast 2 distinct votes, one specifically for president and one specifically for vice president. This would make a Jefferson-Burr-style tie impossible. It was a neat piece of constitutional engineering designed to patch a dangerous bug in the system. Congress passed the amendment in December 1803, and by June of 1804 it was ratified by the states. The vote was overwhelmingly popular. Federalists and Democratic Republicans alike agreed it was a necessary repair to safeguard the nation. They believed they had simply clarified the election process, ensuring a smooth transfer of power. What none of them understood was that in creating 2 separate ballots, they had done something far more consequential. They had, for the first time, constitutionally legitimized the idea of a party ticket, a formal, pre-packaged slate of candidates. It was a desperate fix that would accidentally forge the political world we live in today. Before the 12th Amendment, an elector cast a ballot for 2 individuals they thought were best suited to lead. The system was designed for a world of esteemed gentlemen, not warring political parties.
But the men who wrote the amendment weren't living in that world anymore. They were living in a world of party discipline, of organized strategy, and of running mates. This is why their simple fix was so transformative. By creating separate ballots for president and vice president, they took the informal party practice of a running mate and carved it into the Constitution. The election was no longer a contest between individual men. It was now officially a contest between pre-packaged teams. This was the accidental invention of the modern party ticket. The psychological shift this created for voters was profound. You were no longer just voting for Jefferson, you were voting for the Jefferson-Burr ticket, the Democratic-Republican platform. It forced voters to think as partisans. The package deal became the only thing on the menu. This new structure rewarded party unity above all else, because a party that could offer a clear, unified ticket had a massive strategic advantage over a disorganized collection of individuals.
What the amendment's authors didn't realize was that they had just created the primary tool of the two-party system. They had forged a new political weapon. And when that weapon was combined with an old American voting tradition, it would prove powerful enough to crush any political competition that stood in its way. The party ticket was now the constitutional unit of American elections. But this new reality collided with a brutal pre-existing mechanism: winner-take-all voting. In nearly every state, the system for awarding electoral votes is like a horse race with only one prize. Second place gets nothing. Third place gets nothing. The winner gets everything. This combination of the party ticket and winner-take-all rules creates a powerful psychological trap for voters. It's the simple, cold math of the wasted vote. Here's the strategic dilemma it forces on every American voter. You might genuinely prefer a third-party candidate, but you know they have little chance of coming in first. A vote for your preferred candidate who can't win is a vote you've taken away from the major party candidate you can at least tolerate. Worse, it might actually help the major candidate you despise to win. This is often called the spoiler effect, and it's the mortal enemy of every third party. Because of this, the political game changes. The smart move isn't to build a small party that reflects your perfect ideology. The smart move is to join one of two massive coalitions, the Democrats or the Republicans, and fight for your interests inside that big tent. The system's math incentivizes everyone, voters, donors, ambitious politicians, to consolidate into one of the two teams with a realistic shot at winning it all. Any other choice is, mathematically speaking, a wasted effort. This is why our politics feels like a trap. It's the reason every election cycle presents us with what feels like a binary, often dissatisfying choice. This feeling of being trapped in a doom loop between two warring tribes isn't a modern failure of character or a lack of good options. It is the direct mathematical result of a system we inherited, a system built by accident under pressure more than 200 years ago. It's the ghost of the election of 1800 still haunting our ballot box. The entire story has led to this point. The founders, men who despised political parties, designed a system so naive it couldn't survive the first real political war between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. That war climaxed in the constitutional crisis of 1800, an election that nearly broke America and forced a desperate Congress into a frantic search for a solution. Their solution, the 12th Amendment, was just supposed to be a technical patch to prevent another tie. But what those politicians didn't know was that by creating a separate vote for president and vice president, they had unintentionally constitutionalized the party ticket.
And this is the final, crucial twist. That small change created a new political physics. When the party ticket collided with America's winner-take-all voting, it forged a political cage with only two doors. The system's own logic punishes anyone who tries to build a third way. So why hasn't it been fixed? Because the only people with the power to change the rules are the two parties who benefit from them. It's a self-perpetuating machine. Our two-party system wasn't the grand design of a political genius. It is our accidental inheritance, a structural flaw baked into the Constitution by well-intentioned men trying to solve the crisis of their day, completely blind to the crisis they were creating for ours. We live inside the architecture of their panic. The frustration, the polarization, the feeling of limited choice. It all traces back to a single, consequential fix that has now defined American politics for centuries. History isn't just something that happened, it's a machine that is still running. If you found this eye-opening, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden causes that shape our world. And leave a comment. What's one thing you thought you knew about American politics that this series changed your mind on?